So he's not wrong there. The Liberals are abusing their power here. That's exactly what they've done with this Canada Post strike. Before they can even negotiate, they just shut it down. They put in a stop to it, and now they're saying they're not going to be delivering mail anymore. I just happened to be walking by Canada Post, and I met with some of the people out on strike and talked to them. It seems that the message out there is not really representing the actual people on the ground. And I thought I'd introduce this guy, Doug Ettinger, President and Chief Executive Officer at Canada Post. Now, who was Doug appointed by? Well, the Liberals, of course. Carla Qualtrough, Liberal. This is back in 2019, appointed him as CEO of Canada Post. And he was appointed again back in 2023 by the Liberals. Here he is. Doug Ettinger is President and CEO of Canada Post, right on their own website. But he's also on the board of Purolator. There he is. Now, immediately you'd think this is a big conflict of interest, but it turns out Canada Post owns 90% of Purolator stock. So naturally, he would sit on the board because of that stock interest. But that does pose an interesting problem here for old Doug, because this is his record here. It's awful. He got in 2019. He's worked with the company, I think, since back 2011, something like that, doing marketing, worked his way through, and then became CEO here. This is his record. And let's ignore 2020 because it was a different year, the world event. So forget about 2020, but just look at this. This is Doug's record. Now, if Mark Carney had this guy working under him in Brookfield, do you think he'd be fired? Yeah, I think so. I think he would be fired. He'd be fired anywhere if this was what he was delivering. Yet he still stays on, deficit after deficit, running Canada Post into the ground, yet he still keeps his big fat cat salary of somewhere between $506,000 to $596,000. This guy's making upwards of $600,000 a year. He's probably getting big, juicy, lucrative bonuses as well. He makes more than the Prime Minister, upwards of $200,000 a year more than the Prime Minister of Canada, with an awful record here. This guy's a financial disaster, and yet he keeps his job. Something stinks here. Something is fishy with old Doug Ettinger. Now, Liberals kicked this can down the road, Canada Post, this whole problem, because they thought the Conservatives would have to deal with it, and well, now the Liberals are having to deal with it again. The fact they just shut this down, they're not letting the people negotiate, they're not letting the unions negotiate, and now they're cutting mail delivery to homes. You've got to wonder, since Doug sits on the board here of Purolator, now his salary is paid by Canada Post, but because Canada Post is so heavily invested in Purolator, for his bonus and his bonus structure, his salary structure, if Canada Post were to tank and do bad like it is, but Purolator was to do really well, it would still benefit him. So if he's got a structure in there where he gets a bonus based on performance, and as long as Purolator's numbers are way up, then he'd be incentivized to push Purolator over Canada Post, despite being the CEO of Canada Post. This is complete speculation. Is he tanking Canada Post or doesn't care about how well Canada Post is doing because he's getting a bigger bonus with that business being pushed over to Purolator? Something stinks over here, Doug. It's really funky. Once again, if you have a tip, go over to moosechart.com, submit a tip here, because something's going on between Doug and the Liberals and this disastrous record. This guy should have been fired